The aim of this video is to help you to take notes when you're researching your coursework and give you some tips about the best way of doing this. Okay, before you start, you will need the booklet of extracts that you've been given. It's called Booklet 1, and we're going to look at the 5th extract. If you don't have that now, press pause and come back when you found it. We're also going to have a look at the following extract. I've put the URL here from the King Encyclopedia. This will be visible on screen, but it might be useful for you to have a printout of that as well. Okay, so why is it important to take good notes as you go along when you're researching your coursework? Well, there's various reasons. If you take notes in the right way, it will help you to actually learn the material and understand what you're learning about much better. Secondly, you won't have to keep looking over the same books over and over again because you'll have got what you need from them the first time round. It also helps you remember, so you won't forget what you've already read. And you won't waste valuable time and energy finding the correct references for quotes and opinions later on, as you'll need to reference these in your coursework. You can take notes by hand or on a computer, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is to make sure that your notes are clear and detailed and that they will be useful to you when you write your coursework later on. So, given that you're aiming for a specific outcome, which is your coursework, you need to make sure that your notes are going to actually help you to achieve that. So it's worth thinking about what you need to do in your coursework. Okay, the first thing you need to do is you need to show that you understand the key reasons why civil rights improved and what the barriers to improvement were. So your notes should be focused around this. You need to be able to give specific and detailed evidence and examples of how and why things changed and the impact of factors and individuals. You need to understand the key debates about the topic you're studying. For example, if you're writing about Martin Luther King, how significant was he in advancing civil rights? Or how significant was the impact of war? Different historians will have different opinions on these issues, and you need to understand what those opinions are and how and why different historians disagree and agree with each other. Finally, you need to form your own opinion. What do you think about the answer to your question? Which historians do you agree with or disagree with, and why? Your notes should help you write your coursework, so you should be aiming to write down anything that will help you to fulfil these 4 aims. This means in your notes you should record the following things. You should write down key facts, events and developments. This will help you to remember what happened, and it will also help you to collect evidence for your explanations later on. You should also write down what historians have said about the events. These are interpretations or opinions that you can then evaluate. It doesn't actually just have to be historians either. If you have, say, for example, a quote from an activist who is giving their interpretation of how or why something happened or the relative importance of different factors, write that down too. You should really record your own ideas as you go along. This helps you to think as you go, and it also means that you won't lose any good ideas. For example, if you come across a historian's view that you disagree with, note down why you disagree with it. If you have an idea of your own, write that down. If you have a question, something you're not sure about, write that down. If you record your thoughts as you go along, you won't forget them. It's very easy to have a good idea and forget it 5 minutes later, so don't bet on not forgetting something. Okay, the last thing to think about is that in your notes you need to make it clear what's your opinion and what's the opinion you've read in a book. There's lots of different ways of doing this. You could highlight anything that's your opinion. One of the most simple ways is just to write me or your name next to your ideas. I'll show you how to do that, how I would do that in a minute. Okay, we're going to start with the 5th extract in your booklet, so make sure you have that with you now. It says it's on page 337 on the photocopy, and it says 10.5, the role of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the civil rights movement. Okay, so the first thing is to open up your coursework notes, and the first thing to do anytime you read any new extract is write the full title. This just means you won't have to go and look it up later. So the full title of this book is as follows. Don't worry about spelling, you can always correct that later. Always put the date of the book as well. Okay. Right, so what we're going to start off with is you should read the first paragraph that starts "The case for King. To many people, both within and without the civil rights movement," and it ends with "A history of the civil rights movement." Just that first paragraph. Press pause and come back when you've read it. Okay, so what do I need to write down from that first paragraph? Well, there's nothing particularly useful in terms of facts or evidence about why things changed, but I will start with that first opinion about King. To many people, Martin Luther King personified the civil rights movement. Okay, so I put it in quotes because I'm going to directly quote it. I probably don't need the bit where it says both within and outside the United States, so I'm going to put ... which means that there's words missing. Okay, and again, excuse the spelling, we'll correct that later. And I'm going to put the page number afterwards, just in case I decide to quote that, and then I can remember where I found it from. Okay, it's not a particularly useful interpretation in some ways because it's not very specific to many people, but I think it's still worth writing down. Okay, the next thing you need to read is the second paragraph beginning "When King was assassinated," and I would like you to go to the end of the quote, which says "contributed mightily to the passage of the civil rights legislation of 1964 and 1965. When you've read that, press play. Okay. Again, probably the most important thing to record in this section is the opinion of of Benjamin Mays, talking about Martin Luther King's impact. So I'm going to make it clear who is saying what and who he is. And when it's been said. I'm going to put King in square brackets because that's not exactly what he says, but just to show that that's what he means. Okay, and again, note down the page number. Okay, at this stage, you probably don't know all that much about the civil rights legislation of 1964 and 1965. If you come across something when you're reading and you think it might be important, make yourself a note to go and find it later. I tend to write notes to myself in capitals just so I can see them clearly. And now I know that I need to come back and look at that later on. Okay, now we're going to look at the next paragraph that begins later in 1977 and finishes with "The power of love could bring it down." Once you've finished, press play again. Okay, so what do we need to record from this? Again, we've got quite a good interpretation of Martin Luther King. So let's just note down exactly what happens. 1977, MLK receives, still on caps, don't want that. And I'm going to quote here, "King was the conscience of his generation." I think that's the most important thing to record. Okay, now, again, this seems to be quite an interesting thing, and it's worth having a little think about this, having a think about what this means and responding to it. Okay, so I think if we're saying he's the conscience of his generation, that suggests that he's the most important person, that he's a leader of his generation. So I've put me to show that this is my idea. Okay, so it doesn't have to be anything very complicated, just some ideas as you go. Okay, I think you're probably getting the idea now. So we're going to skip on to page 339 where it says "The case against Martin Luther King." And the first paragraph that begins "Ella Baker." If you could read the first paragraph beginning "Ella Baker, a former staff member," and then finishing "Martin Luther King had played a marginal role." Press pause to read it and press play when you're ready. Okay, because I'm on a new section, I'm going to make sure that it's really clear where I'm reading. So I'm going to put here the case against Martin Luther King. Right. Again, I think that the most important thing here, perhaps, is Ella Baker's quote. I think that's really quite interesting. It's a good interpretation. So I'm going to write down who said it, Ella Baker, and I'm going to write down who she is. I might want to go and find out a bit more about her later on. And the quote here. And I'm going to remember to note down the page number. Okay, and again, it's worth thinking about what this suggests to record your own thoughts. Okay, so this is what I think about this. Okay, so I've interpreted the quote there, what I think about it. It suggests that the movement would have happened without him anyway, maybe suggests that people were already fighting for civil rights and that these people allowed him a platform for his success. Now, this actually is quite different to the idea that he personified the civil rights movement and he's the conscience of his generation, that he's the leader. So I think I'm going to write that down too here. Now, what do I think about this? Well, I'm not sure yet because I haven't read all that much about it. So I'm just going to start recording some of my thoughts. I'm going to put me just to make it clear that this is what I think. Okay, so again, I've put here, my thoughts at the moment are, on the other hand, just because the movement made him, that there were activists before him, does this actually make him less significant, even if he wasn't the first or the only civil rights activist? Well, I don't know yet, so I've put here that I need to look into exactly what he achieved. Was it more or less than others? So I know where I'm going with my research. Okay, other things that you could note down in this paragraph are some of the evidence that Ella Baker, that the authors of the book give for this opinion. So it says here that the civil rights movement was in existence before Dr. King became involved. The NAACP had already won the Brown case. That might be worth noting down. Also, King wasn't involved in Little Rock. Notice that I'm not copying out loads of text here. I'm just putting down some key ideas. And then it says here that on the whole issue of desegregation in education, Martin Luther King played a marginal role. So I'm going to put played a, and I'll quote marginal role. Okay, so I've got some evidence to back up Ella Baker's idea. Okay, so obviously in real life you'd finish reading this particular extract, but for the purposes of this video we're going to stop here. So we've got some notes and we've got some opinions, some historians' views, some interpretations, and you've written some notes, some ideas of your own here as well. Okay, now it might be worth at this stage just to show what the historians' views are. Now you can do this any way you like. You could write historian's view or interpretation in the margin as you go, or what you could do if you wanted is just highlight once you've finished. So that's an interpretation. That's an interpretation. So's that. And this is an interpretation. And if you just make it clear somewhere what you've highlighted, that means that when you're looking for your interpretations later on, it will become much clearer to you. You're reading through your notes. This down here is just information, so we don't need to highlight that. Okay, in this extract we've seen quite a few different interpretations of King's role. When you read more specialist sources, what you need to do is you need to pick out the view of that particular author. In this case, with this extract, the idea is just to give a variety of views. Other authors will be making a clear argument of their own. Sometimes that might be difficult to do, to summarise the argument just by quoting. So therefore, it's a good idea to try and summarise the argument given in the piece at the end of your notes of a particular chapter or section. And again, put it in words that you understand. You can use quotes as well, but summarising is also helpful, just so you know what's really been said. Okay, now we're going to look at a different source which will probably give us some quite different information. This is an internet source. It's from the King Encyclopedia, which is part of Stanford University. Really good resource. I recommend this. Okay, if you are taking notes from the internet, I strongly suggest that you start off by just copying and pasting the URL so you can find what you were looking for. Now, URLs do change, so write down when you accessed it as well. This one should be pretty stable, but we'll note it down anyway. Okay, because this is pretty small and you won't be able to look at it on screen, I'm going to show you this in PowerPoint. Okay, so we're going to start off with this first paragraph. And if you just take a moment to read this. Okay, so it's quite tempting when you're looking at things on the internet, simply just to copy and paste all of that information into your notes document. Please don't do that. There are various reasons for this. Firstly, if you copy and paste, you won't read it properly and you won't remember it. Secondly, you'll be then tempted to copy and paste your notes into your coursework. And if you end up doing this, essentially you've pinched somebody else's work, and that's plagiarism. And that means that it's not allowed in terms of your coursework. So you need to think about what information you're going to write down. Do the thinking. Okay, well, I've got some basic information here that I might want to remember. So I'm going to put this in bullet points just to make it clear. I'm going to put Rosa Parks arrested on the 1st of December 1955. I also got that the boycott lasted 13 months. And I got the result. So the Supreme Court Okay, so I've got 3 key facts there already. And again, it doesn't have to be anything particularly complicated. Just record this in your own. For the next section, so you don't have to watch me typing, I'm just going to add in my notes. So if you could just read this extract, you've got the URL here. Spend 5 minutes reading it, and then I will show you how I've taken notes. Okay, so you can see that I've recorded in my own words who coordinated the boycott, what followed the boycott, any background to it, a little bit about how it wasn't just Rosa Parks, how it was initially planned as a one-day protest, and also who the first person was to initiate the boycott, really, or to initiate a longer boycott, which was E.D. Nixon. Now down here, we've got that on the 5th of December, on the one-day boycott, 90% of black residents stayed off the buses, which was a big success. Nixon and others then discussed the possibility of making this a longer campaign. During the meeting, the Montgomery Improvement Association was formed and Martin Luther King was elected president. Now, even though this is just a fact, this is also something worth thinking about and maybe recording your ideas as you go along. So what we're thinking about, if we're thinking about the significance of King, is how far is he the driving force behind change? And in this case, behind Montgomery. So I'm going to write down me, so I know that it's me that's thinking this. Okay, so I've just noted down the fact that King's been elected president of the Montgomery Improvement Association after the first day of the boycott, so he clearly didn't start it. Looks to me like E.D. Nixon might be the driving force, and because he suggests making the campaign longer. Perhaps this means that Martin Luther King is less significant in Montgomery, so I'm just going to raise that at the moment. I might find evidence to counter that later on. But I'm recording my thoughts as I go. Now, notice in this section that I haven't found any historians' views, so I don't have to highlight them. Now, that doesn't matter. You won't find historians' views or interpretations in absolutely everything you read. The key thing is to record what's important in what you have read. In this section, I have collected lots of useful information and begun to think about how the information might help me to answer my question, which is the key point. With any source is to think about what in the extract you're reading is actually useful and respond to it. So this could be just noting down what you need to remember, write your ideas and your interpretations and your thoughts as you go, question the source if you need to, or even just note down that you need to look something up. Okay, finally, when you're making notes, the key question comes up of how much to write down. Now, you're going to have to find your own way to do this, but be realistic. You won't remember very much if you don't write it down, so all the key information and quotes should definitely go in your notes. However, as you go on with your coursework, you will read the same information more than once. For example, in lots of different sources. For example, you'll probably find several times that you read that Rosa Parks was arrested on the 1st of December 1955. So you don't have to write that down each time you see it. This means that your notes later on will probably be a bit shorter than your notes at the beginning. Okay, to summarise then, my top tips for note-taking. Okay, always note the full title of the book and put it in your bibliography as well. Copy and paste that at the same time. This will save you lots of time later. Note down the page number of any fact or quote so you can reference it easily. Look out for key facts and developments as you go and note those down. Look for interpretations or historians' views. Remember, they can be the interpretations of activists or journalists or anyone else. It doesn't have to be the historian writing the book. I would say, where possible, use your own words in your notes. This means that you're processing the information in a way that you can understand it and you're not just literally copying stuff down without thinking about it. The obvious exception to this is if you're quoting someone, in which case put it in quotation marks and copy it down accurately. Okay, note down your own ideas, responses and questions as you go. And however you do it, make it clear that this is what you think. I always write me, you could write your name or your initials, or if you want, you can highlight it in a different colour, although that could be a bit laborious. Okay, I hope you found this helpful. Good luck with your note taking.